So what happened last week? Dusty, my little Dusty, he's my 14-year-old, and he is trying out for basketball at Liberty. Okay, so it has been really stressful. I'm shocked that I'm acting like this. I woke up on Monday morning and I looked at Rob and I had big tears in my eyes, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, now what did I do?" And I'm like, no. I said, if Dusty doesn't make this team, it's going to break my heart. Like, his heart will be broken and my heart will be broken. And for all the other times he went to smaller schools. So it's kind of like basketball tryouts consisted of the 8 kids that showed up, and then they all made the team. So this is an actual tryout, and there's a lot of kids trying out for this team. And so it reminded me, Mom, and I know I've told you my pom-pom story before, but when I was a freshman in high school, I went to Greenway High School. We lived in Sunburst Farms. It was a really, really small school at that time. I was the first freshman class. They only had freshmen and sophomores. How hard is it to make the pom-pom squad, okay, when there's like no one at the school? Apparently really hard, okay? So I was so overconfident that I was going to make this ridiculous dance team that when it came time to make up my own dance, I decided I don't need to do that. I'm just going to go in there, they'll turn on the music, and I'm just going to dance my life away, okay? And after 20 seconds, I ended it, okay? And the judges are looking like, really? Did you not prepare? Which I didn't. And so what they did back then is they would kidnap you at night. So they would come if you made the team, and then they'd go and have a big slumber party or something. And so you knew if you woke up the next morning and you were still in your bed that you didn't make it. So I woke up the next morning still in my bed, okay? It was really sad, and I know my mom, it just had to break her heart. And I know how that feels, like, desperately. Year 2, I decide, okay, I'm going to do this the right way. One of my best friends was on the pom squad. Everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, you're going to make it, no problem." I worked, I did a dance, did everything. We were so sure that I was going to make it that I had my pom-pom friends spend the night. So when they came to kidnap us, they would only have to go to one house instead of 2. Well, they came to my house and they told my mom, "Lori made it, Lisa did not." Okay, it was really heartbreaking, and I could just feel my mom and so now I know. So I don't want Dusty not to make it, but it's so stressing me out. So I will let you know. Finally, last night he got in the car, and I said, "How did you do tonight at tryouts?" And he said, "Mom, this is what I've come to the conclusion. I'm going to work the hardest I can possibly work, and if God wants me on the team, He's going to make that happen." Okay, that's fine. But I really want you to make the team. So, but I realized that with my life, that when I didn't make it for those 2 years, He got me involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. If I had been on the Palm Squad, I don't know spiritually if I would be today where I am, because they gave me a base for my spiritual life. So I know God works all things together, so I will let you know next week if He makes it or not. So anyway, thank you for all the great encouragement from Micah last week. It was so fun to have him here. He did a great job. I was really proud of him. So I'm hoping that it gave you a lot of encouragement of how God really can change someone's life, because Micah literally was the toughest child that we ever had growing up, and God has just come in and done a wonderful work in his life. So hopefully that helped you guys. It helped you. So, okay, last week we talked about Jesus when he was 12 years old and he went to the temple. I'm not going to really go past that today. I want to go back to that because we went down a side road that way. I want to end up today talking about the temple and what that actually means today. I want to talk about religion. I want to kind of go back off of a little bit what we talked with Micah about last week. So go into your handout, and we'll just start Luke 2:39, where it says, "When they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city of Nazareth. The child continued to grow and become strong, increasing in wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover, and when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning after spending the full number of his days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan and went a day's journey. They began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him." Now, the interesting part about Luke is that when we read in verse 39, it says that once they performed everything, which is the 40 days after, so Jesus is 40 days old, then it says he moves to Nazareth. But between verse 39 and verse 42, a whole lot happens that Luke does not even put in there. Like, it's not in his heart to tell us what happened, the rest of what we know is the Christmas story. So it's not in there because Luke doesn't care that much about it, and I couldn't figure out why. And so then I started reading Matthew's gospel, the part that Luke misses, and it dawned on me. Because if we remember that each one of these authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all wrote to a different audience. So Luke is writing to you and me if we're Gentiles. Like if we're Jewish, then you wouldn't be in that category. But he's writing to us. So the things that Matthew talks about are prophecy, things that he wants the Jewish people to know. And we'll read that in Matthew 2:13. We're going to pick it up right after the Magi shows up to Jesus and gives him the frankincense and myrrh and gold and all those things. We'll pick it up right there. Matthew 2:13, now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. Now, it's interesting. Luke just never tells us any of this. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined for the Magi. Then that what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. Now, it dawned on me afterwards why Matthew decides to put all these, because we'll see in a second, there's 3 things that he quotes Old Testament. Because that's not Luke's audience, but Matthew's audience said, look, you're Jewish, and I want you to know that the things that are prophesied in the Old Testament about the coming of the Messiah, Jesus is going to fulfill. This is him. And he needed them to see the Old Testament because the Jewish people would know the Old Testament. He wanted them to understand that this is who he was. And I thought about this later because I thought, you know what, when I start doubting my faith, or let's say I wake up one morning and I just think, God, you just seem so distant, you're gone, I don't know where you are, and maybe I'm just believing something that's not true, and you just kind of have those moments of doubt. I always go back to 2 things. 1 is Israel, and 2 is all the fulfilled prophecies. If you, some of you are not with us in the Revelation class, if you go online and look at lesson 3, it's called The History of the Jewish Nation. If you watch that, you will see a promise that God made back to Abraham, and all through now, Israel is a state now, but all the things that they had to go through to get to that, because God says that land is theirs, and this is my covenant I'm making with the nation of Israel. And so when you see that, it makes you go, okay, the Bible really is true. There's also 2,500 prophecies in the Bible. 2,500, that's a lot, saying this is going to happen, and then 500 years later, it actually happens. 2,000 of those prophecies have already been fulfilled. There's only 500 left. And those 500 all are really about the end times and what's going to happen when we're doing Revelation. So when I start questioning things, I always go back to the Bible really says 2,000 things that happened, and they already have happened. That gives me a lot of confidence in God, a lot of confidence in his word, a lot of confidence that what he says is true. So Jesus ended up staying in Egypt, and we have no idea for how long. Some people say 3 years, some people say 1 year. But whatever it was long enough for there to be a change in this government. Because Herod dies, now you've got somebody new. Look at verse 22. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee and came to live in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. So, within Luke 29 to 40, all of this happened, and they end up in Nazareth. And I want to just remind us that it's one more reason to see that God really is in control of everything. He's in control of who's running the government. Look at how he put Herod in the place of whatever it's called, government, whatever. They put him in there, and God had a reason for it because Herod was the one who said, hey, we need to build the temple for the Jewish people. So that temple needed to be built. And so God knows exactly who needs to be in place for such a time as this, because that's just how God. Then think of the census. He made sure that a census was done for such a time as this, because God needed to have Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem. So the government is a very, very big part of God, and he is in charge of who he raises and deposes at this particular time. So I want to say that God had a plan for all the leaders back in the time for Jesus' birth to come on the scene, and God is going to start raising and putting in leaders that will push us on to the end times. So I want to just kind of give everyone who is really worried about next Tuesday, this whole election thing, because God really does honestly control who's going to win next week. And so it's our job to vote and to do those things that we're supposed to do, and we need to tell people what we're doing. But I will tell you how I vote. And this is going to sound really silly. I vote for whoever likes Israel, okay? So they have to have biblical values. If they're a friend of Israel, I'm all about it. And then if they give tax breaks to small businesses, which we are, that's my third thing. So there's a little about me in there at that. But I think when we see in Genesis, and I just kind of want to throw this out to you today, in Genesis, God tells Abraham that I'm going to build the nation of Israel. And if those that are a friend of Israel, God will bless. Those that are not a friend of Israel, God will curse. And so you see that all through the Bible about being a friend of Israel. Now, the cool thing is that when Israel became a state, the United States was one of the very first people to put their stamp on Israel as a free nation. And we've always been a friend of Israel. And so I want to show you, though, that it's not going to always be that way. If you look at page 3 on your handout, Zechariah 14, it says, "Behold, the day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided among you. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city exiled, but the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on the day of battle." So the Bible tells us that from the beginning of time, there's creation, there's this birth of a nation. Through the nation of Israel, through the Jewish people, will come a Savior. Savior's born, saves the world, and then it's going to go into the whole end time stuff, so it's just, everything's just right on schedule. But that verse in Zechariah tells us that eventually, even the United States is going to walk away from Israel. Every state, every country in the world will come against Israel. That's just the way it is. So, knowing that, I say eventually somebody in the leadership position is going to say, yeah, we just don't want to be friends with Israel anymore. And they're going to start taking other alliances, and that's just kind of what's going to happen. So, I just want you to be aware that the world is rolling on, not to be fearful. The end times could happen 50 years, 100 years, a million years for all I know. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? The bottom line is eventually that's going to happen. And so I just want you to be rest assured that whoever wins next week, God is going to use him to do whatever needs to happen in the world and in the government system and everything that's going on. Because the world's changing, and it's changing really, really fast. And it's just so funny to me that little baby Israel, no bigger than like New Jersey, is this epicenter for everything. So keep Israel in mind when you vote, I guess, is the thing. Daniel 2:20 says, Daniel said, "Let the name of the Lord of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding." So know that next week, by next Wednesday morning when we come in here, we're possibly going to know who our new president is. But if it's not your guy, know that God's still behind it. He hasn't just got off of his throne and it's like, oh, I can't believe that person won. God's doing something, and we can sit back and be rest assured, even though we don't like it, we need to go back and say, I know God's doing something. Okay, so let's pick off where we left off last week. Pick up. Jesus is going to the temple at 12 years old, and I want to kind of keep on this theme of religion, because last week Micah really talked a lot about how religion really can ruin someone's life, and I want to just kind of continue on with that theme. Now, at this point, Jesus comes to the temple and he gets lost. Or he doesn't get lost. His parents leave without him because they assume he's with the caravan. And I remember one time we lost Sean in Coronado. We were at the Hotel Del just walking through, and he was 5, and he just disappeared. And it's so frightening. So I can't even imagine what Mary and Joseph are going through at this particular time. Nowadays, probably every 5-year-old has a cell phone, so you wouldn't even lose them for that long at that point, because it'd be like, oh, hang on, let me find out where he's at. I'm at the arcade, we're good to go. Okay, verse 46. Then after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When they saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." You can feel the panic in Mary's voice. I think most of us would grab him and shake him and be like, "What are you doing? How could you do this to me?" But this is what he says. Verse 49, and he said to them, "Why is it that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?" So this is kind of a monumental thing for Jesus to say this, because his father is Joseph as far as anyone's concerned, but it's almost a turning point when he wants Mary and Joseph to know, look, I get this, but I am in my Father's house. This is kind of a big deal for me. Luke 2:49 in the Amplified, I like this, so I put that in there for you. And he said to them, "How is it that you had to look for me? Did you not see and know that it is necessary as a duty for me to be in my Father's house and occupied about my Father's business?" Okay, so when I read that, it made me think about my own life, because I thought, you know what, the great thing about Jesus is that he understands at 12 what his mission in life is. And his mission is to be all about his Father's business, his Father's mission. What is God calling him to do? And Jesus seems to understand that, and I often wonder in my own life if I am more about my Father's business or if I'm more about my own personal business. Before people come to Christ, and for me, I think that our goal in life is to be happy. I just want to be happy. I want it to be about me. I want everyone to do everything for me. I want to go on vacation. I want to do all these things. Everything's about me. Okay, but I think that when we become a Christian, then everything changes. Things can't be about me anymore. Now they have to be about him. We have to make our mission, God, what is your mission? And that mission is to share the gospel and bring as many people, as Don Wilson always says, go to heaven and take as many people with me as possible. So that it happens to be Jesus' mission for us, and we need to kind of ask ourselves, am I on that same mission? Am I like Jesus saying, I just want to be about my Father's business? God gives us 3 things: time, talent, and treasures. So he gives us a number of days in our life. And we have to sit back and say, okay, am I using those days wisely? Am I saying, God, what can I do today to further your gospel? Talents. Everyone here, God has given a gift. I could be anything. It could be you're just a prayer warrior. You give a lot of money. You teach, you help, you do whatever. God has given you something. Now, how are you taking what he's given you and expounded on that? And God, I just want to serve you. So what you've given me, what can I do to bring more people to you? And then treasures. God gives people money, possessions, whatever. How are you taking those and in turn helping to share the gospel? Verse 50 then says, which I find this kind of almost the weirdest statement. His parents say, or it says, but they did not understand the statement which he had made to them. And I thought that was really interesting. You have Mary and Joseph who didn't understand the statement when in fact she got pregnant as a virgin but had never been with a man, and an angel shows up to her, and an angel shows to Joseph, and she's seen all of these miraculous things, but she doesn't understand that Jesus is talking about his Father being God. I mean, to me that was kind of really, really odd, but then it made me go on to another thought process that says that needs to be an encouragement to us, that when in fact we decide to make Jesus our mission in our life, that people are not going to understand that. They're going to think that we're kind of crazy. We have a guy in our small group. He's a police officer. And on Sundays, we have our small group at 3:30 in the afternoon, which is usually right in the heart of the final end 6 minutes of the Cardinals games, okay? So he goes to work, and he's with kind of a rough crowd, I think. And they were like, oh, did you see the end of the game? And he was like, yeah, no. And they're like, what do you mean you didn't see it? What were you doing? He's like, nothing, He's like, no, really, why didn't you watch the game? And he goes, well, because church, we go to a small group. You go to church? They laugh. They think that's so funny. They can't even believe that he would choose church over a Cardinals game, okay? But people laugh at him. They can't believe that his allegiance is not for a sport, but it's for just learning about God's word and being fellowshipping with people. So people are going to laugh at you when, in fact, those things change. People are going to laugh at you if you come to Christ and they're like, well, hey, you want to go out drinking with me this weekend? You're like, yeah, I don't really feel like doing that anymore. Ha, 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 why is that? Or are you religious? That's the new thing. Did you turn religious now? People ask Dusty that at school. Are you religious? It's like, no, I'm a Christian. I'm not certain, I don't know why you think it's religion. But even everything, you're sitting with your friend and they're gossiping about someone, and all you want to do is just talk nice about the person. And they don't understand that, so they make fun of you. Or you turn on Christian radio. So people are not going to understand when you and I become a Christian because our allegiance has now changed. Now it's like our whole goal and mission in life is now to further the gospel. It's not the way it used to be anymore. And we've changed. That's what happens when we come to Christ. Verse 51. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them, and his mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. Okay, so now, the reason why Jesus went to Jerusalem back when he was 12 years old is because at that particular time, there was a law in Deuteronomy, we'll read it in a second, and according to Jewish law, you had to go to Jerusalem. Now remember, they're in Nazareth, which I have my book, but can I throw that? I'm sorry. We are going to do a little of the Holy Land book. I'd probably like. But if you looked at the beginning of the pages, you can see the same thing. Nazareth is all the way up at number 17. It's on one of the first pages, the map. And Jerusalem's pretty far down there. It's down there on number 11. So from Nazareth to Jerusalem is a long way to go. And so it says in Deuteronomy 16:16, 3 times in a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the feast of the unleavened bread, the feast of the weeks, and the feast of the booths, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. So, 3 times a year, Joseph is supposed to go down to Jerusalem to all these feasts, but when you're a really, really devout Jew, you take your family with you. It's kind of like, yay, road trip, we're going to Disneyland, except they went to the temple. So that was kind of what they did. They traveled in a caravan. Remember, Nazareth was a teeny tiny little town. So for them, this is like the coolest vacation ever. They got to go to this massive big temple and see all the high priests and the priests and all the religious activity that was going on. So for them, they were probably like so excited to actually be going to do this. So I want to talk about the temple, because before we go on, the temple's not there anymore, and there's a really good reason for it. So I want to show you what the reason is behind that. I want to show you what was going on at the time of Jesus, why everything was so religious, and why Jesus came and basically replaced what these people did. Now, to be a Jew, their whole goal in their life was just to obey the law. The strict adherence to the law was of utmost importance to them. But the problem was that their religion overtook their relationship with Jesus, with God, because Jesus wasn't even on the scene at that point. But their religion took over any relationship that they had with God. And suddenly this temple, this place that they would go and visit, became almost like an idol to them. It was who they were. It was what they went there for. The feeling that it wasn't about God anymore. It was about religion, is kind of what it was all about. If you look on page 5 of your thing, there's a picture. And it's a model. If you go to Israel, you can actually, it's a huge, huge area that they did this big model. Like you walk around it and you can kind of see. So this is what it would have looked like in the day of Jesus, except it would have been filled with lots and lots and lots of families and people. And so the religious things that were going on was just rituals and sacrifices, and everything for the priests were about what they wore and who could, pray the loudest. And what originally that God meant for the tabernacle and the temple was, I just want you to have a place where you can come and worship me. I don't want you to worship the place. I want you to worship me in the place. And for some reason, the Jewish people, they didn't understand how to do that. The temple became their focus, and they didn't ever want it to go away. And so what happened with a religion like that is that suddenly it became all about works. What good can I do? I have to do the most laws. I have to be the best person. Just what Micah said last week. It's exhausting. It's exhausting to feel like you can never be right with God. I can't do enough. How much do I have to do to get to heaven? It's overwhelming, and it will destroy your life. And for here, this is what Jesus comes to get rid of, because his highest rebuke is for people who are religious. He hates the religion that was going on. He hates religion, and he couldn't stand the religious people. So what I want you to see is the shift from the temple now to Jesus. Look at John 2, verse 19 on page 4. Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Oh, so now what we're seeing is there's this shift between the temple and everything that went on with the temple, and now Jesus is saying, I'm the temple. Now, I want to show you something. In the Old Testament, everything that was going on in the Old Testament was a foreshadow to Jesus. So, all the way back in Genesis, you see Adam and Eve, and they sin in the garden, and they hide from God. And so God goes in, and he sacrifices an animal, gets the skin, and covers them with animal skin. So, in a sense, it foreshadows that there has to be a covering for your sin, and it's going to take a sacrifice. That's all the way back in Genesis, and that's going to point to something that's going to happen in the future with Jesus. Look at Noah. Noah comes along. There's going to be a big flood. He builds this big ark. He says, whoever wants to come, come. And what did they do? They laughed at him. They thought it was so funny. Ha, 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 you're building an ark. There's one door to walk into this ark. Anybody's welcome to come, and nobody does. And the minute that ark door is shut, it's over. Like, you don't have a second chance. You didn't come through the one way. So when we look at Noah and the ark, we see it foreshadows the fact that Jesus is the only door, the only way to God, the only way we can get to heaven, and we have to go through that door. Otherwise, it's going to be closed someday, and we'll never know God. Joseph, another one. We studied Joseph when we did Genesis. He was loved by his father. I mean, he was his father's favorite. And then you see Jesus. He was loved by his father. You see, Joseph was despised by his brothers. Jesus comes on the scene and is despised by his Jewish heritage. Everyone, his friend that he knows, are Jewish, and they don't like him. They can't stand him. Joseph went to prison. Jesus goes to the tomb. Joseph ends up saving his family and an entire nation, and Jesus dies on the cross to save all of us. So we see in Joseph's life this foreshadowing of Jesus. Isaac, promised to Abraham. Jesus was promised as the son of the nation. Isaac was promised as the son to Abraham. Isaac was born by a miracle. His mother was 90, barren, and it was miraculous that she became pregnant. And the same thing with Mary, Jesus' mother. She was a virgin, miraculously got pregnant, and all of this points to Jesus. The other thing, too, is when God told Abraham to go sacrifice Isaac, Isaac carried his own wood up to the sacrificial area, and Jesus carried his own wood. He carried the cross on his back. So we kind of see everything. So I want to show you how the temple foreshadowed what Jesus would do. So if you look at that picture back there on page, whatever it was 4, I think it was, the temple had all of these different functions. So if you see that picture right there, it's square, and you have the whole temple area, and then you have that really tall building right there. And if you look at page 6, you have another picture there. That's actually what it looked like. So the priest, if you remember Zechariah, when we talked about him at the beginning, he would go into this part of the temple. Inside of there, you would find the Holy of Holies. Page 7 of your handout, that's a picture of it. You would see that the priests would go in, they would trim the menorah lamps, they would, do incense, burn incense, do whatever they did there. But you see there's that curtain right behind the candlesticks. And right behind there is what is called the Holy of Holies. And this is where God showed up, like his presence was there. So if you want to get close to God, you go there, and the closest you get to that Holy of Holies, you're going to be the closest to God. That's just how they always felt about this whole area. If I could turn the page, I can tell you. So when the temple was built, it was built so that God could be present when you would come to him. But the problem is that they started worshiping the creation instead of the creator. And I think that we tend to do that sometimes too. But if you wanted to be close to God, you would have to go to Jerusalem. And unfortunately, even today, we have the same thing going on. If you go to Jerusalem, what you see on page 8 of your handout is kind of what you see. There's Jewish women and men that are literally by the wall, the Wailing Wall, which I'll show you in a second. But this is underground. You go underground in Israel, and you can see all of the big, massive walls of Herod's temple. They're down below the ground. And it's interesting because if you look right there at that picture, it says women praying in the tunnel at the closest physical point, not under Islamic jurisdiction, to the Holy of Holies. Now, if you look in your Holy Land book, you'll see on page 140. Let's just start there for a second, because I want to show you, so whenever you look on the news and you see the Dome on the Rock, this will kind of make sense. Where that Dome on the Rock is, on page 140, the big 141, look at page 143. Actually, let's look at page 142 and 43. That big crowd of people up there on the left, that in there is the Wailing Wall. That's called the Western Wall. So this is where the Jewish people go. It's the one wall that's left of the temple. And they still feel like you go and you can put prayers in the wall. They feel like if they're there, they're closer to God. It's crazy. It's religion at its finest. If you look under any of the pictures on the right-hand side on page 143, there's the Dome on the Rock. Now, sitting underneath that Dome on the Rock is where the Holy of Holies used to be when the temple was there. So you've got Jewish people that are trying desperately to get underground, to get into there, because they want to find the Holy of Holies. They cannot imagine that God has left this place, but he has. He's not there anymore. I found an article on ChristianAnswers.net, and I wanted to read this to you because it'll kind of give you an idea of what's going on in that whole area. It says, most of the world is now familiar with the explosive events which took place in Israel during September of 1996. The underground tunnel is at the center of the controversy, was known officially in the 1980s as the Western Wall Tunnel. Unofficially, it was called the Rabbis' Tunnel because it was a project of Orthodox rabbis in Jerusalem. Work on the tunnel began shortly after the Six-Day War in 1967 under the Ministry of Religious Affairs. The rabbis did not discover an ancient tunnel, but dug their own narrow horizontal mine. It started from the area of the Western Plaza, also known as the Wailing Wall, and ran north along the outside of the western wall of the Temple Mount compound. The Temple Mount, which now houses the Muslim shrines of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome on the Rock, was refurbished by King Herod as part of his renovation of the Second Temple. While the rabbis worked with the government knowledge, there was little government oversight. Professional archaeologists also had little interest or involvement in the project. As they tunneled north along the Temple Mount's western wall in 1982, the rabbis found an ancient sealed underground gate. They broke through the gate, began to clear out chambers beneath the Temple Mount. Reports suggest that they were looking for evidence of the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy of Holies from the ancient Jewish temples. So this is what's going on. They are desperate to find the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, they think it's underneath there, and so they want to find this. It said Palestinian workmen on top of the Temple Mount compound heard the sounds of their digging up through a cistern. They opened the cistern, rushed down. In an area where the cistern and gate complex came together, they found the Jews clearing out the gate room and passageways beneath the mount. A Palestinian riot resulted with numerous injuries. The Israeli government stopped the work beneath the mount and sealed the underground gate. Yet the rabbis were allowed to resume their digging northward along the outside of the western wall. So what goes on here is that here you still have people, Jewish people, that are idolizing a spot, something that is just a religious icon to them. It's not even about God anymore. It's about trying to find something, and God is saying, I'm not there anymore. And so I think that the best thing about the temple being destroyed in AD 70, God just wiped it away, because I think he was trying to make a point to say, look, I do not dwell there anymore. If you want to come to me and have my presence within you, you're going to have to come through Jesus, because he's my temple now. The temple is just a place with bricks and stones and all that. But you need to come through the only way, which is Jesus alone. And they miss that. They miss that whole thing, and they're still there doing religious things, trying to keep the law, wailing and crying because they're looking for the Messiah, and he's already been here, and they've missed it, and it's the saddest thing. It's just heartbreaking. So the first thing that the temple was known for the Jewish people was just God's presence. The second one is for sacrifices. Now, at the time when Mary and Joseph took Jesus to the temple, they always had to bring lambs or birds or whatever it was that they had to bring to sacrifice, and constantly people were sacrificing animals to make God happy with them, to atone for their sins. So every day there's sacrifices, additional sacrifices on the Sabbath, extra sacrifices at the start of the month. And then you had the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, you had the Passover, all of these other extra feasts, more sacrifices. So everyone was flocking there to get their sins atoned for. So when Jesus comes along, he takes what was going on in that temple and said, we don't have to do that anymore. It's over, it's done. If you looked back on that picture of the page 7, where you have the Holy of Holies, and you have that curtain, because God was supposed to dwell behind that curtain. So when Jesus died on the cross, and there was a big earthquake, God literally took that curtain and split it from the top all the way to the bottom. And his point was, there's nothing in between us any longer. Like, my son has now died. He's paying the price for you and I. If you will accept him into your life, you don't have to work your way to heaven anymore. And so when Jesus comes along, he takes away from that temple the entire sacrificial system. And now he's the sacrifice for that. Hebrews 7:26 says, For it was fitting for us, it's page 10 of your handout, for it was fitting for us to have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners and exalted above the heavens, who does not need daily, like those priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people, because this he did once for all when he offered up himself. So Jesus is saying, look, we don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to bring your lambs and your goats and your animals. You don't have to do that. I've done it once for all. We don't have to go back there anymore. Hebrews 10:11, every priest stands daily ministering and offering time after time the sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But he, having offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, sat down at the right hand of God, waiting for that time onward until his enemies be made a footstool for his feet. For by one offering he is perfected for all time those who are sanctified. So we see that the temple existed for the presence of God, the sacrifice, and the last one is for worship. It was a place for people to go to sing and pray and worship and eat and have fun and whatever they did there. And I always think it's like CCV on steroids. So that's when I think of the temple, that's what I think of. Like, because you go to CCV and you worship and you sing and you raise your hands and you praise and you pray and you go eat, and that's always kind of fun. But the problem with Israel at that time is that they replaced that building. That building became the main thing. Number 10, or page 10 on your handout. Luke 21, verse 5 and 6. And while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he, meaning Jesus, said, as for these things which you were looking at, the days will come in which there will not be one stone upon another which will not be torn down. He's saying it's going. It's going to all be gone. And people were furious with him. Think of all the religious people. But that's my idol. That's where I go. That's all about me and my religion. And Jesus is saying it's going to be gone. It's bye-bye. You don't need that anymore. People hated it. The Roman government, they made tons of money off of the temple. People were there and they were selling animals and they were Jesus went in with the money changers and just wiped everything out because people were making money off of the temple, a place where it was supposed to be all about God. And even today, if you go to Israel, it's just like that. Everyone has a gimmick. Everyone's selling something. One little man, like you get on, he has a little donkey. And he goes from the Mount of Olives down, back up, and he just carries his little donkey, and people are like, yay, can I get a picture? That'll be $5. Okay, everything is about money there. And I think that Jesus was furious about it back then, and I think today he would be just as furious about that today. Now, I know if you've been here, I've told you my Israel story before, but the very first time we went to Israel, I literally came back, and I was teaching through Revelation at the time, and I came back, and I just had a really hard time. I said, I feel like I lost my faith. It was a hard time for me. And I realized later it was because I was taking Ambien, and Ambien doesn't mix with me very well, trying to get my sleep schedule. Somehow it depressed me. And what I saw when we went there was people that were so religious, like they were in church every day and at Mass, and they were, at the Wailing Wall, banging their head on the wall. And I'm thinking, geez, I don't do that. Like, I'm lucky if I just go to church once a week, okay? But somehow in that religion, it made me very depressed because they're missing the whole point about why Jesus even came. We went on the Sea of Galilee, and it was kind of really cool because you go on these boats and they play worship music, and here you're on the sea where Jesus walked on water. It was the coolest place ever. So as I was walking off, I looked at the people who put this on, and I said, oh my gosh, are you guys Christians? And they're like, no. And I was like, you guys aren't Christians? No, this is just a business. Okay, so now you're on the Sea of Galilee with a group of people, don't even believe in Jesus. It destroyed me. It destroyed everything about me. I was so shocking. We went to one of the sites, and there was a bus load of kids. They were on a field trip. And on this field trip, out walked armed gunmen. Like, because they're protecting these children, thinking your kids can't even go on a field trip because of the religious wars. It was devastating to me. And then the last thing we did, we went to Hezekiah's tunnel and came out on the other end, and it was a whole Palestinian area, and everything was garbage. There was garbage everywhere, and people, and it was sad, and these little kids were throwing rocks at the people that were on our bus. And I got on the bus, and I'm so devastated by this time, and I look out, and I see this little boy. He must be 4 or 5 years old, and he was sitting on a wall, and he looked up at me, and he had these big brown eyes, and I just cried. I cried and cried and cried. I thought, God, what is the problem with this area? It's all about religion. Nobody knows you. The only way they know religion, and that's what happens with religion. Destroys people. It makes wars. It makes this poor little 4 or 5 year old never be able to know Jesus because he's taught from the time he's young that Jesus isn't even real, that he's a prophet, that he's a bad thing, not a good thing. And he's taught that he has to go worship, pray, bow the knee 5 times a day to Allah, who doesn't even exist. And he's raised in this religious scene, and it just broke my heart. But I think the thing is that we need to remember that God is not there. If you're a very religious person, God's not in your religion. He doesn't want that. He wants to be in your heart, because he has now taken everything from that temple and embodied it in Jesus. All the outer stuff is gone. So if you know Jesus, then he's the temple now. That's all we have to go to is him. And it made me think about the Jewish people and this temple as this is their idol. And I want to just say one thing about idolatry, that we did this in Revelation last week, that we look at idols as something like a carved wooden something or a whatever you bow down to. But an idol in this day is something that, what is it that gives you the most purpose in your life? What is it that defines who you are? What is it that you pour your life into? That would be your idol. And so I came across a question this week, and I want you to think about this, because I think it will determine in your mind if you have any idols. And the question is this: if you could ask God for one thing, just one, and that one thing can't be, oh, I want 100 more wishes. Okay, it has to be one thing. What would it be? What would that be? Dear God, could you give me fill in the blank? And I think it's going to tell you a lot about your own personal life. Like, God, could you give me more money? Now, I'm all about money. God, could you give me fame? I'm not about fame. God, could you help my business to grow? I'm all about that. Okay, a new husband, I don't need a new husband, one is plenty, to win the World Series. Couldn't care less about baseball. That Dusty would make basketball. That might be my prayer. I mean, so what is it that matters so much to us that we would ask God, this is the one thing that I want in my life? Or have you moved to this side where you say, God, I just want you to use me for the rest of my life. God, my one wish in life is that all of my children and grandchildren would serve you till the day they die. God, I just want you to use whatever gifts and talents you've given me for your glory. See, I think what the answer to that question is what really is important to us. What is our idol? For the Jewish people, it's the temple. For us nowadays, it's not only the temple. It's other things. It's other things that take over our life. Solomon, the same. Am I late? I don't know. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Are you kidding me? 1 minute. Okay, I'll finish this real quick. Solomon in 1 Kings, you can read the whole thing. Verse 5, 1 Kings 3, verse 5 says, In Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, ask what you wish me to give you. Okay, that's our question. God's saying, what do you want? And look at verse 9. Solomon says, So give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? And it was pleasing in the sight of the Lord. See, Solomon didn't really care about riches and all those kind of things, even though God gave that to him. He cared about one thing: God, I just want to serve you. And the interesting thing about Solomon is that he wrote Proverbs. He did all this, he was a very, very wise man. But the interesting part about Solomon is that he never, ever lived what he actually taught. His kids, if you go to CCV, you've learned last week that his son was so far from God. And I think it was because Solomon talked the talk and never walked the walk. And I think it's a reminder to us as parents, we can tell our kids about Jesus and how to live and how to do this. But if we're over here lying and cheating and cussing and drinking and carrying on and telling them over here that they shouldn't be doing those things, they're going to be just like Solomon's kids. We have to come to the grip of saying, God, what you tell me and what I do and what I say, my kids need to see that too. Because if they don't see that, they're going to walk away just like we got to be able to live it. So I just want to end today by saying that I want us to stop and look at our life and say, God, first of all, I want to make sure that my life is all about you. But two, I want us to make sure that we're not putting our faith in a religion to save us. I just read an article the other day. It said people, as they get older, they get very fearful of where am I going to go if I die? Like, it really is a thing. As you get older, you think, have I done enough? What have I done wrong? And so today I want us to just say, many people here may need to repent of that and say, okay, God, here's the deal. You died, sacrificed once for all. You're the temple. I'm placing my faith and trust in you alone. It's not you plus how many times I go to church. You plus the times the money that I give. You plus how nice I am and feed the homeless. It's not about you plus. And sometimes I think that we worry about our salvation because we add the plus onto that. And we need to lose the plus from here on out and say, God, when I get to heaven, just like Micah said last week, I'm going to hand you Jesus' resume, not mine. And when you get Jesus' resume, I'm going to go in because I have put my faith and trust in him alone, not in a religion, not in doing good works, not in any of those things. So that's a dreadful way to live if you don't put everything in Jesus.